Hi everyone, welcome to TSAM Digital. My name's Amy and today I'm joined by Mandy Kirby, who's the Chief Strategist and Co-founder at Hive, which is a think tank and advocacy group that is working towards building an inclusive investment management industry, as well as a sustainable society. So welcome Mandy, it's great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so just to kick off, could you tell us a little bit about Hive? Because I know it's quite a unique organisation. Just tell us a bit about your mission and what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. As you mentioned, we are a think tank and advocacy group, and we work across the industry in various different capacities. We do research, we do advisory, and we run campaigns. So we currently have a current one called the Fearless Women campaign, which is looking at the run-up of 50 years of women trading on the London Stock Exchange. We have our ACT corporate culture standard, which is for investment companies. And we also offer accessible professional development services to help build a diverse talent pipeline in the industry. And we work with the Stewardship Council of fund gatekeepers from across the industry who are, really telling us about the issues they're digging into now, some key ones around sustainability and culture.
That's fantastic. So out of interest, have you noticed that there's been a better response in the past few years and we've had more discourse on these issues?
Definitely, yeah, we've definitely had a lot more reception, and some of that is being driven by the increased interest from stakeholders and from the regulatory space. And also, I think as firms become more aware of lots of these issues that have been in the public domain in the last couple of years, and the importance of topics around culture and values and well-being as well.
Amazing. So I think we often talk about ESG from a financial product point of view, but you're obviously looking at it in terms of the firms themselves. So what have you been doing with corporate responsibility in terms of in-house culture within the asset management space? Any kind of, I know you've mentioned a few key initiatives there, but anything else that you think firms need to improve on?
Well, we've got expertise from different areas of the industry within Hive, and also have an ongoing dialogue with various different parts of the industry. So it really helps us to have a holistic picture of what is happening in the firms. And I think one key thing is firms have really changed the way they talk to clients about the services that they're delivering. We've got a lot more around public commitments to sustainability and I think authenticity as well in investment practice. And that's increased alongside the focus on returns. But for firms to be able to deliver on these commitments, they need to be able to sort of mirror their internal values and practice as well. And we found that whilst we've got kind of growing regulation in the pipeline in this space, with the stakeholder pressure as well, there's not a lot of guidance for investment companies to be able to tell their story and to be able to talk in a structured way about what they're doing. So we went off the back of our consultation with the industry and created our ACT standard and framework, which is a standardized way for investment companies to be able to understand where they are and to be able to make change in their culture and their values so that they can better deliver for stakeholders and for clients, but also to create a way for them to talk about what they're doing and to be able to have a good picture internally of their progress. And we're doing this in partnership with the Door due diligence platform. It's very important to Hive that we are accessible and inclusive. And so we've put the framework on the platform, and any company can access the framework for free to be able to look at the question set and to be able to respond to it. And that enables two things for us, really. It's not only that it's creating a structured way for firms to think about the topic, it's a structured way for them to disclose it. And so that's going to help to have more coherence across the industry in how we talk about these things, and to be able to help create better progress towards change, measurable change.
That's fantastic. I think that's really inspiring, and we definitely need more of that. You mentioned, that there's a lot of regulation, but there's sort of a lack of regulation as well. I know that the Financial Reporting Council kind of has a bit of oversight on firms and how they operate. And in terms of the products themselves, we've obviously got the UK's SDR, EU SFDR, and then the US has their own regulation. But is there kind of one that falls in line with your ACT framework? Because I know that's quite a unique framework that you've put in place there.
So at the moment, it's kind of agnostic in terms of the regulations that it applies to. We've kind of designed it in that way because most regulators will tell you that they don't want to be too prescriptive in what they're suggesting firms do. And we've taken the same approach. What we want is for people to be able to talk well about what they're doing and to be able to recognize what good looks like in what they're doing. And, for a firm to be able to do this well, we think that there's a couple of things that apply here that would apply across any strategic business priority. And that means that you've got the right kind of high level commitment, you've got accountability at the senior levels as well, and you've got it being well resourced. But you also need some of the boring stuff around it, the things people organized, the thing that gets the scaffolding and the structure there so that people have got things to deliver against and report against. And so that means we need things like public commitments and KPIs and transparency. And those things can apply to any particular regulatory framework. And the reality is that the businesses that we work with and the industry we're in is a global one. So we need it to be kind of agnostic to the regulatory area, but upholding those kind of high principles of, being organized, being monitored well, and having that right level of accountability.
Yeah, interesting points about accountability there, because I think that's something we don't often talk about. Just to give a bit more deeper examples of that, can you sort of give some advice on how firms can achieve a better level of accountability internally?
Yeah, I mean, all the things that I mentioned about actually treating this as something that is a strategic business priority is going to help to put that structure in place. And it's going to help because it will make the business more effective, because it's identifying something that needs to be tracked and monitored. And so once you get those feedback loops in place, then that helps for a firm to see progress. For us as well, though, it's not just about doing the bare minimum there. It's about having something within your structure that challenges what you're doing. So when you've achieved a certain level, how are we going to go and test the water and making sure that we are still at the forefront of what we could be doing? Are we talking to our employees? Are we monitoring from the employee side what they think about our practices? Do the things that we say we're doing internally match up with the things that we're doing externally? And these are all things that you can create reporting structures around it. It's very possible for firms to be able to do that. But there's not much in one place at the moment for firms. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to create this structure.
Yeah, well, hopefully it gains more traction and more people come on board and take on that framework. So yeah, beyond firms kind of looking to revolutionize how they do things in their structure and their culture, another thing I'm keen to ask your opinion about is when it comes to emerging markets, when we're talking about firms breaking into new territories, how can they ensure that they have good practices and integrate ESG in a way that is sustainable?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been quite challenging for firms to be able to find that good and comparable data. That's been a major hurdle. And also for some markets, it's also considering the kind of, administrative capacity there and the maturity and stability of institutions and whether or not they've got the right instruments there that will enable the investment. I think we are seeing now, it's quite exciting. There's a lot more innovation in terms of the products and ideas that are available. And I think what is quite tricky for companies is actually balancing some of the regulatory aspects, because there's now significant requirements from the developed market locations, which may or may not apply in the markets that they're looking at. And the other thing I think is difficult is we've got this very clear set of signals that sustainability is critically important and that we should rightly be considering ESG factors in investment decision making. But it's still quite easy to invest in non-sustainable areas, and there's not really probably enough pressure on companies to change their practice, which puts investors in quite a difficult position because, they're obviously looking to create value, but, catering to this much wider range now of stakeholders and to increasing expectations on the role that they're playing in, shaping society to be more equitable and sustainable. So it's quite difficult for them to strike that balance.
Yeah, completely understandable. And you touched there on innovation that's coming out. Are there any examples or products that you can think of technology that are making it easy to access that data so that firms who are committed to, sustainable emerging markets, not just the ones that are kind of easy to access, as you say, are more available to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes across two different areas. You've got, on the one hand, a lot of gaps to fill in terms of the data. So, for developed markets, we've got a pretty broad set of industry and company data that's available. And then in the emerging markets, you've got a lack due sometimes to, there are fewer companies that might provide that data, or it might not have been collected, or it's not as reliable, or it's not as comparable. So then you have to use kind of proxy data or forecasts, and putting that into models can be difficult to have a comparable sort of tracking of risks in emerging markets. So that might mean that you've got a more manual process happening for your analysts. But they've known all along that also the data we're looking at in the ESG space sometimes is qualitative and it's all backward looking. So they've always had a job to do in terms of turning that round to be able to extrapolate and to understand whether the risks that are emerging there are being managed, or whether they're ongoing concerns and so on. And so I think there's something that they can do there in terms of having consistency in the questions that are being asked, which helps set expectations with the companies. And over the long term, this creates a better data set for people to work with. So that's on one side. But then I think there's a technical aspect to it as well, which, there's so much that happens in companies in the back office. There's so many data management systems. And I think that there's lots of innovations happening there in terms of knitting all of those systems together. And that might be new systems that are being built which have got ESG data in mind, or it could be existing things that people have in place, existing infrastructure, and having to integrate things on top of that, or overlays, or whatever it is. And this is really a lot of the time very invisible work, but it's critically important to keeping companies running. And so I think obviously we see a lot of that at TSAM as well, in terms of some of those providers that are, the nuts and bolts and holding the back ends together, that enable people to spend their time doing the deep dive analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. At our TSAM ESG event coming up, we'll have to kind of ask those questions, the data technology providers, and see if they can provide any insight on how, the general integration can be used to kind of give better access to those areas where the data is lacking, like emerging markets. I'm curious to continue that conversation then. But just as closing thoughts then, because I think we're sort of running out of time, what advice would you give to financial professionals who are looking to take a more proactive approach in standard setting? Because I know that's something that you've got experience with yourself.
I mean, I think to get ahead of the game, that there's really, there's clear signals that there's regulatory pressure in this area. It's not going to let up. And we really need industry to be involved in that conversation, to be able to say what is possible and what is, achievable, and what would be a good outcome. And so I think by taking, a more strategic approach, it's going to help not just the industry, but the individual businesses to be clearer in their objectives, and to better identify risks and opportunities. And ultimately that's going to create better outcomes for clients in the end.
Absolutely. Well, it's been lovely talking to you. I'm really a fan of your work, and I hope it continues to go well, gains more momentum as people get more on board with these, the ACT framework and everything. So thanks so much for joining us, Mandy.
Thanks very much.